Not all goodbyes are spoken. Not every ending comes wrapped in explanation. Some of the most final things a woman ever says are the things she never voices out loud. There is a silence that lives at the end of love. Not the kind that waits, the kind that watches everything die slowly and decides to walk away without ceremony. This silence is not passive, it is not soft, it is not hopeful, it is sacred, it is sovereign. It is the breath she takes when she knows no more words will save her, and, though he may not know it yet, the moment she stopped speaking was the moment she was already gone. This is the story of a woman who said everything, and then, finally, nothing, because her final word was the one she never spoke. She started by trying to be understood. She wanted to love clearly. She wanted to explain her triggers, her longings, her fears. She wanted to create connection through transparency, so she was honest. She shared her past. She named what hurt her. She asked for what made her feel safe, but he heard none of it, or worse, he heard just enough to perform interest. 2. Keep her talking while never actually listening. So she kept explaining, kept softening, kept hoping that if she just said it better, he'd finally understand. But he didn't, because understanding was never the goal. Control was, comfort was, avoiding his own discomfort was. And she realized you cannot explain your truth to someone who benefits from misunderstanding it. 2. She thought clarity would bring closeness. She believed that if she could just make him see, they could grow. She thought if she named the cycles, he'd meet her halfway. She thought if she opened her heart completely, he would rise to meet her. But every truth she offered was deflected with defensiveness. Every vulnerability she expressed was met with withdrawal or blame. He didn't want clarity. He wanted to maintain his comfort, and clarity would have forced him to confront the truth. That he wasn't showing up, that he was emotionally absent, that she was giving more than he was ever willing to. So she stopped trying to make it clearer, because clarity is a gift, but it becomes a wound when offered to someone committed to confusion. She tried softness, and then strength, and then silence. First, she spoke with softness. I feel unseen. I need more presence. I want to feel safe with you. Then she spoke with strength. We keep doing this. This pattern isn't love. I won't keep begging for consistency. And when nothing changed, she stopped speaking. Not in bitterness, not in rage, but in full-body knowing. This is not where her truth belongs. Because if her voice needs to scream to be heard, it's not being heard, it's being tolerated, and she was not born to be tolerated. She was born to be met. She realized silence is not absence, it's completion. When she finally stopped talking, she didn't feel numb, she felt free. Not because she didn't care, but because caring no longer required her to explain. She sat in the silence and felt everything. The grief of overgiving, the ache of not being mirrored, the peace that came when she stopped contorting. And in that silence, she found something sacred, completion. Not the kind he would recognize, but the kind her body had been waiting for. The kind that says, I don't need closure from you, because I already closed the door in me. She stopped warning him that she was leaving. She used to say, if this continues, I can't stay. If nothing changes, I'm going to pull back. I need more than this. She gave him the gift of forewarning, the chance to shift, the opportunity to rise. But each time she spoke, he leaned on her patience. He assumed she'd always stay. And so one day, she said nothing. She just slowly stopped texting first, stopped filling the space. Stopped overfunctioning, stopped asking for what should have been given freely. And still, he didn't notice, not until the silence was too loud to ignore, not until she wasn't just quiet, she was gone. She understood that love offered without listening is a performance. He said he loved her. He said he cared. He said he'd try. But love is not in the performance of saying, it's in the act of receiving. He wanted to be seen, but refused to see. He wanted to be forgiven, but refused to change. He wanted to be loved, but didn't want to listen. And eventually, she understood love. That cannot receive truth is not love, it's self-interest. So she withdrew her words, not out of punishment, but to reclaim her power, because love that can't hold your truth does not deserve your voice. She no longer needed him to hear her because she finally heard herself. She used to speak so he could understand. Now she listens so she can remember. Every word she used to offer him was a breadcrumb back to herself. Every time she said, I need, I feel, I want. What she was really saying was, I am still here. Don't let me abandon myself again. But he didn't hear it. So she turned inward, and that voice inside, the one she silenced for years, began to speak, not in volume, in resonance, and she finally realized his validation was never the goal. Her own listening was. She speaks less, now not because she's unsure, but because she's rooted, and what once needed to be said now simply is. Because the final word she never spoke was the one that freed her, and it didn't need to be heard. It needed to be lived. There's a moment in every woman's life when she realizes she is no longer speaking to be understood. She is speaking only when it deepens her alignment, and when it doesn't, she chooses silence, not the silence of fear, not the silence of suppression, the silence of clarity. She is no longer offering her voice to avoid being abandoned. She is offering her stillness as proof that she has returned to herself. This silence is no longer passive. It is sovereign. And those who cannot hold it were never meant to meet her. These are the next 7 emotional initiations of the woman whose final word was never spoken, but embodied. She no longer fights to be seen. She simply stops showing up. She used to work for visibility, to be noticed, to be prioritized, to be held without asking twice. She dropped hints, gave chances, spoke with patience. But when the pattern didn't shift, she realized something profound. If someone only sees you when you stop showing up, they were never looking with love. Now, she doesn't fight for space in anyone's field. She doesn't overextend her soul just to be remembered. She lets absence do the work. Because if her silence feels louder than her presence, it was never presence they valued, it was access, and that ends now. She learns that detachment is not cold, it's sacred. People tell her she's colder now, but they don't see the fire it took to become this clear. They don't feel the grief it took to walk away without closure. They don't know how many times she screamed internally before she found the strength to stop speaking. She isn't cold, she's consecrated. Her energy is no longer on autopilot. Her attention is no longer for sale. Her softness is no longer scattered. Now, she doesn't rush to fill silences. She doesn't chase conversations that leave her empty. She lets the sacred come find her, because warmth, when weaponized by others, becomes weakness. But in her hands, it's choice. She discovers that her silence invites the truth to surface. Without the noise of over-explaining, she begins to notice who reaches out when she stops, who mirrors presence. Without prompts, who disappears when she no longer maintains the dynamic. Silence reveals what words concealed. It reveals the roles she played to keep others close. It reveals the imbalances she disguised as patience. It reveals who came for her soul and who stayed for her softness. Now, she uses silence as a compass. It tells her who feels safe. It tells her what no longer resonates. It tells her what her nervous system already knew. And the truth it reveals It never needs to be spoken. It is felt. She stops writing closure letters in her mind. She used to script conversations in her head, what she would say if he finally listened, what she would explain if she had one more chance, what truths she'd offer if he asked why she pulled away. But now, she doesn't need those rehearsals. She no longer performs healing for an imaginary witness. She no longer shapes her pain into something palatable. She simply feels it, holds it, releases it, and lets it transform in silence. Because closure is not about the other person's understanding. It's about her body no longer bracing for misunderstanding. It's about resting in her own release. She no longer gives anyone the privilege of her pain without presence. She once believed that love meant transparency, that if she hurt, she should share, that if she longed, she should confess. But now, she sees that not everyone deserves access to her tenderness. Her pain is sacred, and presence is the price of entry. She no longer hands her heart to people who haven't earned her trust. She no longer spills truth into empty spaces, hoping it will turn into connection. Now she waits, she watches, and if the room cannot hold her silence, it will never hold her soul. She allows her energy to speak before her mouth ever opens. Before, she filled silence with performance, smiles, softness, strategic compassion. She feared what others might feel if she simply was. But now her energy enters first, and she lets it speak everything. Her no lives in her stillness. Her enough lives in her unavailability. Her never again lives in the way she doesn't react. She speaks less now, but says more than ever. Because what used to take paragraphs of explaining now takes one look and complete disengagement. That is the power of a woman who no longer needs to be loud to be clear. She embodies a love that no longer performs, it radiates. In the past, her love was effort. It was explaining, soothing, chasing emotional safety through self-sacrifice. Now, her love is breath. She pours it into her plants, her body, her mornings, her sacred routines. She pours it into people who meet her in stillness. She pours it into the parts of herself that no longer need proof. She doesn't perform softness to keep peace. She is peace. And her love is no longer loud. It's magnetic, the kind that doesn't call attention. It calls alignment. And for the first time, she doesn't need to say, "This is who I am." Because those who are meant to meet her will feel it, and those who aren't will feel her silence, and that, beloved, is the whole point. Here is the expanded version of part 3, for her final word was the one she never spoke, with added emotional weight, symbolic texture, and soulful presence, designed to deepen her return from silence into embodiment. There comes a moment when she no longer needs to be heard, not because her voice doesn't matter, but because she's already listening to something older, deeper, and more divine than approval could ever offer. She walks differently now, slower, more anchored, not from fear, but from sovereignty. She no longer rushes into clarity. She waits for resonance. She doesn't need fast answers. She trusts sacred timing, and with every breath, every step, every glance, she speaks without a word. Because the woman who no longer needs to explain her soul becomes the woman whose being is explanation enough. These are the final 9 integrations of a woman whose final word was never spoken, because it was never supposed to be said. It was supposed to be lived. She carries no hunger to be proven right. There was a time she burned for it, to be seen, to be acknowledged, to hear him say, "You were right, I should have listened." She craved it like oxygen, because part of her healing still depended on being witnessed by the one who ignored her pain. But she no longer aches for that moment, because she gave it to herself. She sat in the fire of not being validated and didn't die. She rose from the ashes of being misunderstood and didn't scream. She finally understood being right means nothing when you've outgrown the need for proof. Now she lets truth be its own echo. She lets peace be her justice. She becomes immune to the pull of old patterns. The invitations still come, the soft messages, the sudden check-ins, the "how have you been?" from ghosts in human form. But she doesn't answer anymore, not because she's angry, but because she remembers. She remembers what it cost to abandon herself, to re-enter cycles of almost, maybe, not quite. She remembers the way her body used to tighten before her mouth smiled to keep the peace. She remembers who she became when she made herself available to confusion, and so she stays sovereign, not out of resistance, but out of reverence. She has returned to herself, and the door behind her has closed. She lives with the calm of a woman no longer waiting. She used to wait for reciprocity, wait for matching energy, wait for emotional maturity to show up at her doorstep. Now she no longer waits, she creates. She builds her own consistency. She surrounds herself with coherence. She crafts a life that doesn't need to be balanced by anyone else. And in this autonomy, she no longer mistakes stillness for lack. Her life is full, not crowded, full, with peace, with choice, with presence. And that is the wholeness she used to beg others to complete. She no longer calls silence a void. She calls it home. Before, silence was the thing she feared most. It felt like absence, like failure, like proof that she had been left. But now, silence is her sanctuary. It's where her nervous system recalibrates. It's where her creativity wakes up. It's where her intuition grows loud. She lights candles not to fill space, but to witness it. She takes walks not to escape, but to feel herself again. She no longer dreads being alone. She dreads losing herself in noise. Because now she knows silence isn't empty. It's elemental. It is her. Her discernment becomes sacred. She no longer needs reasons to say no. She doesn't collect red flags before exiting. She doesn't ask for second chances on someone else's behalf. She simply knows. If the energy doesn't feel clean, she moves. If the words don't match the vibration, she listens to her body. If the offer doesn't honor her spirit, she declines without guilt. Her discernment is not cold. It's consecrated. It has been earned through every moment she betrayed her knowing for the comfort of someone else. And now that she's reclaimed it, she no longer doubts what her silence tells her. 6. She gives her joy a voice again. There was a time when her laughter was scarce, when her sensuality felt unsafe, when her pleasure was tied to whether someone else approved. Now, she lets herself feel good again. She sings in the kitchen. She dances without recording it. She lets sunlight touch her skin like a lover. Her joy is no longer transactional. It's primal. It's not for performance. It's not for anyone else's story. It's for her because she made it through the silence and found herself smiling again. She no longer carries others' silence as self-blame. She used to believe that if they stopped responding, it was because she did something wrong. If they pulled away, she must have been too much, too intense, too sensitive. Now she sees it. Clearly, other people's silence is not always a reflection of her. Sometimes it's their own fear, their own avoidance, their own inability to meet depth. She doesn't chase answers from disappearing acts. She doesn't decode the distance. She doesn't make abandonment a mirror. She simply releases, because if silence arrives without presence, she lets it leave too. 8. She becomes the threshold, not the seeker. She used to seek approval, validation, security in the eyes of others. Now, she is the sacred threshold. Not everyone gets to step into her world. Not every energy gets access to her softness. Not every invitation is accepted. She is not here to prove, she is here to radiate. And those who are ready will feel it, not in her words, but in her presence, her quiet, her refusal to explain herself. She is not the woman knocking on closed doors. She is the door. She lives as the final word. She doesn't write letters she'll never send. She doesn't rehearse conversations that will never happen. She doesn't script answers for people who never asked. She simply lives now, with grace, with fire, with stillness. She is not seeking closure. She is closure. She is not waiting to be understood. She is walking as truth. Her final word was not an argument, not a goodbye, not a defense. It was the way she rose, the way she created, the way she loved herself louder than they ever could. And the world may never know what she didn't say, but they will feel it in every room she no longer enters. And that is the legacy of a woman whose final word was the one she never needed to speak.